Well, hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Sundays. It is Between Two Sundays. We're between the fifth Sunday of Easter and the sixth Sunday of Easter. And I sit here on the precipice of these two Sundays coming out and going in with my good friend, Mr. Mark Beresford, who is ready to go down rabbit holes with me again. How are you, my friend?
I certainly am ready. Really been looking forward to this.
Yeah.
Right back.
We've had some really good readings the last couple of weeks. If you've missed the last few episodes, go back and have a listen. And I've just said to Mark before we hit the record button that this week's readings particularly really resonated with some deep stuff that we're pretty excited about. Before we do that, though, of course, in the tradition of Between Two Sundays, we talk about how we lived out of the readings from last week, which was the fifth Sunday of Easter. What has stuck with you, my friend, and why?
Yeah. So what stuck with me is this last verse of our John 13 reading. Right. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And I've really been trying to sit with that, because, this is one of those verses we know well. It's very quotable, very memorable. Yet I've tried to trying to consciously encourage myself and others to actually believe this, to live it out, and because I meet so many people who I get into discussions with them from the church, and I end up leaving thinking I'm not sure if they believe love is enough.
To be recognized as a disciple, or
to be recognized as a disciple, to be is it enough for me to share, just to love someone else, or do I have to, add to this to be effective? Do I need to, is there some kind of gospel explanation that has to go alongside it in order to make it legitimate, almost? And there's something in me that wants to look at a verse like this and say, hang on, maybe it really is enough to love. And maybe the things love sparks are the things we need to fan into flame and not come with some other kind of agenda. So I've been trying to trust love. I've been trying to, I've been going into my local cafes and stuff and learning people's names who serve me, and as one of those little ways for me to say I see you, and to treat others as human rather than simply an object of my fulfilling my needs, and going away from there and praying for these people by name, and really trusting that that my treating of another human being as a human being is the kind of love that will spark whatever needs to be sparked in them, and indeed in myself.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. I remember reading a number of years ago, Selwyn Hughes, who used to write the Every Day with Jesus, was talking about speaking at a seminar and shared the gospel message pretty much as we've just talked about it. And afterwards, he had someone come up to him and say, "So you're telling me that this is all there is?" And they went, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, no, it's far too simple." And that person wasn't a Christian. This
wow.
person was kind of far too simple. I can't believe that. It's far too simple. And just recently reading Alan Watts, both in a lecture I listened to and in his master's thesis for his master's in theology, when he was studying to be an Episcopal priest, talking there about how as humans we just like to make things so complicated, that this grace and this love, this accessibility to God, which is what Jesus came to open up our eyes to, we would rather think that it's jumping through hoops and saying this prayer and going to this thing and jumping in this puddle of water and anything else, whereas the reality is that God is, I guess that's a sentence, God is, and there's nothing more. So yeah, it's really interesting that, isn't it? That even still, we consistently ask ourselves the question, is this enough?
Yeah.
And yet Jesus here is affirming us that yes, it is. So much so that to carry that through into the reading from Acts last week, it's sort of this connection between that part and the reading from Acts for me, that Peter had this vision, and basically it was a vision that literally said, it's for everyone. It's for all. This is how people know you to myself, is love one another. You need to love those people who are outside of your in-group. That's how they will know that you are my disciples. And in essence, as you've said, that's how they will know who God is as well. I was talking to someone just this morning, actually, talking about the number of times when Paul uses the phrase, even the Gentiles. There's this idea in Paul that Paul's trying to get across, saying, look, this is the promise, but it's even for the Gentiles. It's for them as well. It doesn't stop with us here within Judaism, of which Christianity was a sect at the time, the people of the way. This is for Gentiles as well. This opens up outside of our Jewish enclave. And so this idea that this love needs to extend, because that is how love grows. Love grows through us, but also as love grows and comes through us, it becomes the language through which people hear the gospel as well. So that idea of loving outside, that this is how people will know you're my disciples, not just in the terms of, hey, there's a disciple, look at them loving, but in that interaction of love with someone, they recognize not so much, hey, you're a disciple, but I can see Christ in you. I can see the presence of God, the Spirit of God living through you. That's what it's about, I think. It was
Richard Rohr is really provocative on this. He believes a Christian is someone who has seen someone who is authentically living out the gospel.
There you go.
So if that seeing is, that's clearly a spiritual seeing, not just a physical seeing. That's what a wonderful thing to sit and ponder.
Yes.
That a Christian is someone who has had their eyes open to Christ in another. That puts this loving of the world in a really central kind of place, doesn't it?
Well, no, we talk about Christians as being followers of Christ, but, this is going to be for another episode or another conversation with you and me, but all those places, we are witnesses. Yes. We are witnesses of Christ. And you're looking at Paul and you're thinking the only witnessing of Christ you've ever had, buddy, is a vision, and you didn't even see a person. You had to ask, who are you? You heard a voice. And yet if what you say is true, then Paul did see Christ. He saw Christ in Peter, saw Christ in James, saw Christ in other disciples. So he was a witness to Christ in the world. That's interesting.
Yeah. The interesting part about that, Mark, actually is why does the cloud of witnesses to Christ need to be limited to the people? This angel, this vision of Christ that appears, Christ is doing the same thing.
Yes.
We're all witnessing in the same direction. All those, angels, all of that stuff. We're just part of it. We're just contributing.
And you can't get away from that. If what we believe is that God spoke a word and things came to be through that word, and John recognizes that word as the Christ, and then Paul says, oh, that rock that Moses hit, that was Christ, and that angel that wrestled with Jacob, that was Christ. And that's why Christ is in all those things, because Christ is in the rock, Christ is in the angel, Christ is in you and I through the Spirit, and lo and behold, which is why all creation, Romans 1:20, speaks so that no one can say they've not had an opportunity to understand and encounter God. Powerful stuff. Wow. That's Easter 5 again. I have to come back to that witness thing. That's another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
We are
That'll be
heading.
great.
Sorry. Yeah.
Really enjoy that conversation.
We are heading towards the 6th Sunday of Easter, though, this coming Sunday, and the passages for this week are Acts, chapter 16, verses 9 to 15, remembering that the Hebrew Scriptures reading that's normally in the lectionary is replaced with readings from Acts through the Easter season. Psalm 67, reading from Revelation chapter 21, verse 10, and then chapter 21, Revelation 21, verse 10, then verse 22 through to chapter 22, verse 5, complex, and John chapter 14, verses 23 to 29. And this collection of readings I really enjoyed chewing on and delving into. Where do we start? I know we normally start with the gospel, and I'm happy to start there if you'd like to.
I really don't mind where we start, but I wondered if your little comment, just as we were discussing Easter 5, your little comment on even for the Gentiles kind of pulls together a theme that sits within all of these readings, and that is the gospel is for everyone. Psalm 67 moves from God bless us to, and then you'll be blessing all the nations. This Acts 16,
let all the peoples praise you. Yeah.
This Acts 16 reading, really has the Spirit of God calling the apostle into Macedonia, where it's found that there are people of peace who are ready to hear. This is way, way beyond the borders of Israel. I think there's something really important about this. And then, of course, our Revelation reading it's all about the nations.
Yeah.
It's this vision of all the nations come together. So much so that the sun is unnecessary, that God is there. The sun that shines on every nation of earth becomes unnecessary in this vision. The leaves of the tree of life for the healing of the nations. There's a really kind of cosmic for everyone theme through all of this, which is pretty. Look, I know no one's going to hear this and say, "Oh, gee, I didn't know the gospel was for everyone." Probably most people will know that, but it really is a groundbreaking statement in its time that was shocking, absolutely shocking, and had to be repeated over and over and over again throughout the New Testament. Last week we looked at that vision where Peter, who's seen Jesus heal Gentiles, seen people heal people beyond Israel, has to be shown this vision 3 times before he even wakes up and starts to ponder what it might mean.
Yeah.
How blind are we when we've built walls between people, between us and others? How blind are we to the needs of others? Which makes sense. I mean, that's what walls do. They stop us seeing. They stop us. They prevent interaction between groups. This metaphorical use of wall. I'm constantly wanting to say this because I don't think the walls for most Christians are built between nations, but we build a heck of a lot of walls to make sure only those who are around me are close to me, make sure they all think the same and all have the same customs and those kind of things. We probably wouldn't object to the statement that God is for all, but At the same time, we seem to have perfected building walls without even knowing we're doing it. Yeah.
And
Anyway,
let's,
might be a place to start.
I was just saying, let's be clear too that, you know, Genesis 12, the first call that God gives to a people is that all the other nations of the earth will be blessed through you. This is a call that isn't just, I'm going to be with you. It is, I'll start with you. And then as you live it out, people will see what it's like to be in a relationship, and then we can all have a relationship. So right from the very beginning, it's for all. Right throughout the law, we see laws that remind Israel, this is for all. But of course, like any group of people, this is not poking a finger at anybody who's Jewish. This is poking a finger at humanity generally. We find ourselves in positions where we like our security, we like our safety, we like our tribe. We like to set ourselves up against somebody else. And so we end up creating an enclave. And so the message is consistently, and if you read through the text, it's there from Genesis all the way through the Hebrew scriptures and then into the Christian Testament. God is consistently saying through the people at various times that this is for everyone, this is for all, this is for the alien, this is for the outsider, this is for the outcast, this is for the Gentile, this is what it's about. So it's not as if this was a late addition that God suddenly says, this is for everybody now, you've been horrible. No, this is a message from the very beginning and part of what was to be. The gospel reading.
This.
Sorry, go on. Yeah,
I was just going to say this allowing this reality to sit with me completely changes the way I relate to other people. For a long time, I related to people as though, I kind of had a message that I needed to take. And there's something in me nowadays that's asking, gee, I'm meeting someone from outside my tribe who does things differently to me. What is God wanting to say to me? And the whole conversation changes.
Yes.
And my level of attention to another is actually exponentially increased, in the expectation not that I'll be able to trip them up or get my message in as, I'm not listening for those things. I'm actually listening for, what is the Spirit of God asking of me? What can this person and no one else show me about God? And that's such a different space to sit with someone in. It makes us, I think it makes me quieter, with perhaps less to say and more, and puts, the emphasis on my listening to another person, which is a very dignifying thing, and I think a very loving thing, as we started this recording with. But it means my encounter with others is much more equal. It's not me coming and transferring my wisdom to you, in a one-way transaction. It's actually both ways. Which is what's going on in that Acts reading from last week. Peter turning up to Cornelius and learning something from Cornelius. It's not just a one-way. This is not this, and Peter is amazed by it. Wow, my eyes have been opened. I've seen that God is bigger than I imagined God was. Before. This whole encounter does something not only for these people, but also for him. And I don't think that's a thing of the past. I think that's still around today. That every time we encounter someone, I think we should realize that the gospel message is bigger than we previously thought. If we listen well.
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the key.
It is.
So the gospel reading, which we haven't quite touched on yet,
Yeah.
that's where I got started. And what's interesting is that the gospel reading actually leaves out the trigger that Jesus causes Jesus to respond as Jesus does. So the trigger to this whole part in John 14, starting in verse 23, is a question from Judas. And Judas asks the question, Lord, how is it possible that you will continue to manifest yourself to us while others won't see you? Or as the more traditional version puts it, how is it that you will reveal yourself to us and not to the world? In other words, how will we continue to see you, but no one else will see
you? Yeah.
How is that possible? And that's what Jesus,
Holy Spirit, yeah,
is responding to. He says, those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Now, a couple of things about that sentence. Those who love me will keep my word. This is not necessarily just about observance. It's really important we understand that the Greek word there also talks to things like guarding, watching over, persevering with, and keeping intact. So this is about keeping the word, not as in doing it, but also keeping the word as in holding it. So those who love me will hold my word, and my Father will love them, and will come to them, make our home with them. And that word home comes from the root meno, which suggests a seamless union. And it's the same word that Jesus uses back in verse 2 of chapter 14 when he talks about, in my Father's house there are many mansions. There is this seamless union. So we're holding the word, the teaching and words of Jesus, and God will make God's abode, or their home, their meno, this seamless union will happen with you. And then Jesus says, whoever does not love me and does not keep my words, doesn't hold them. And the word that you hear is not mine, but it's from the Father who sent me. I've said these things while I'm still with you, but the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I've said to you. And so this is the word, spirit, which will connect and then find a voice within them so that the word can continue to work through them. And what's really interesting is that straight after that is that famous, verse 27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. So peace I leave with you, peace I give to you. So he's saying the Spirit will come, and that Spirit I'm going to leave with you, and that Spirit will give you peace. And I'm going to leave that peaceful Spirit with you and give it to you. And your heart will not be troubled, and your heart doesn't have to be afraid anymore. And then finally says, you heard me say to you, I'm going away, I'm coming to you. If you love me, you would rejoice that I'm going to the Father, because the Father is greater than I. So there's a suggestion here of the possibility of a much closer presence than was possible if Jesus remained in the flesh. I have to go away so that we can have this connection that's going to be deeper, far deeper than anything that you could ever imagine. So the gospel talks about this beautiful, seamless abiding between the disciple and with God and the Spirit of God that will bring peace and allow the voice of the Spirit to work through them. Now, if you look at the other readings, this becomes really apparent that it seems to me the message across all of them is this God is moving and providing and transforming and happening within people because of a close proximity that this God wants to have. So the Acts reading, Paul has this vision. Where does this vision come from? It comes from intimacy. This intimacy, this reliance on the Spirit of God, this recognition of God's Spirit moving and having their being with Paul, reveals this thing, come over to Macedonia and help us. And verse 10, when he had seen the vision, they immediately crossed over to Macedonia, because there's this intimacy. This is what it looks like when we have this close connection to God. Luke even uses the words, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. That's why they're going. So there's this conviction in Paul because of his trust in this peace and spirit that abides in him, with this intimacy there, that this is where we have to go, because this is what God has called us to. And what's interesting, by the way, I reckon this harks back to the story in Mark, where Jesus has had a really busy day of ministry and gets up the next morning, goes off and prays somewhere. They find him and say, hey, everyone's looking for you. And he says, oh yeah, but we've got to go here. We're not going to go back down there. We've got to go this way, which is exactly what Paul does. And what's interesting is if you go down to verse 14, when he has the encounter with Lydia, it says there, Lydia was a worshiper of God, listening to us. And the Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. So here's that very thing we talked about before. Lydia is a worshiper, so she's a Jew, and she's got her heart opened to what it is that God's calling her to in terms of understanding what she has to do now, where she has to move now, to the point where she immediately after she has this encounter says, come to my place and stay with me there. So here is this intimacy in action, not just in Paul, but also in Lydia. And then down in the Revelation passage, we have this beautiful imagery, if you want to take it as a metaphor, for what this intimacy looks like. So, there's this holy city coming down out of heaven from God. He says, I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord. So the proximity and intimacy is so close, no temple necessary, because you already have that intimacy and interaction. Then it goes on to say, no need for the sun nor the moon, for the glory of God is its light and its lamp is the Lamb. So there's no need for light because this proximity to spirit brings light. And it just goes on. There's this continual presence because of the proximity. So none of the things that were required for this intimacy to be recognized, rituals, temples, all these other stuff, Revelation is saying it's not necessary. When you have this intimacy with spirit, intimacy with the divine, these things become obsolete. Not that you have to get rid of them. If they help you engage, then fine, but there's no need for a temple because of the intimacy that's there. There's no need for the sun or the moon because the light is always shining. The gates will never be shut because there's always access. It's 24/7 accessible to the Spirit of God. So the reality is that this whole week's readings for me carry this beautiful message of close proximity, and the close proximity that God wants to have with us, which is revealed to us through the very life and ministry of Jesus. When we see Jesus doing what Jesus does these things because he had this connectedness to the Spirit of God, this connectedness to the divine, where there was no breach, there was no wall, there was no disconnect, that they flowed. The Father and I are one. And what's really interesting is that Jesus says, and you can have that relationship too. That same proximity that I've experienced, I'm showing you what it looks like so that you too can live it and live it out. So there's this beautiful, beautiful theme that I caught of proximity, this closeness, this intimate relationship that Jesus wants the disciples to understand is only possible if, I had to come in the flesh so you could see what it looks like, but you're not going to be able to experience it for yourself unless I go away. So I can get out of the way so you can experience it for yourself. And I think there's something beautifully humbling as well about Jesus here saying, it seems like my task is done. It's been revealed. It's time for me to get out of the way so that you can enjoy that and be the new visibility, like we were talking about before.
Yes.
Be that new visible presence of love in the world so that others can encounter the divine through you and that you can encounter the divine through them.
I love holding that that intimate proximity you describe and rightly see in all of these. next to the invitation to all that we've also seen here, this call to the nations, this call beyond the walls that we build as people, this invitation to all to intimacy with God.
Yes.
I think that's a beautiful way of pulling these texts together for this week. And gee, maybe that's enough.
Yeah, let me wrap it up just by reading, because I think it fits really well with what you said. I've been having a look at a version of the scriptures called the Mirror Translation.
Right.
Incredibly powerful. Think what Eugene Peterson did with the Message. This is very similar. A South African scholar has been working on it for a number of years. I can't remember their name. But let me read verse 23 to you from the Mirror Translation, the words of Jesus, because I think it fits beautifully with what you just said, and I think will be a nice segue out. So just say what you said again, Mark, so you were saying that the proximity message isn't just for us, it's for all, right?
The proximity, the invitation to an intimate relationship with God is for all.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say.
So here's Jesus' words translated in the Mirror, the translation from verse 23. They will treasure my words and encounter my Father's love resting in them. And my Father will appear face to face to them and make our abode with each one.
Wow. Very nice.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Wow, that is a perfect place for us to leave it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Mirror Translation, I'll look that up.
Yeah, look it up. It's very good. I encountered the John 3:16 from the Mirror, and I thought I got to have a look at the rest of this because it's very powerful. So check that out. So there you are, my friends. That is our reflections on the 6th Sunday of Easter coming up this Sunday. Don't forget that you can engage with our other materials. We have articles over at barefootfollower.life, posts at both at Between Two Sundays and at Monk in Docs, the podcast. Please and leave your messages, comments. We do want to hear them. We are interested in them because we too are growing. And as Mark said earlier, that idea that, we are as much here to listen as we are to speak, and do have our ears attuned to what it is others are saying, because we too want to grow and stretch and become everything God has called us to be in that sense as well. Whew. All right, my friend, until next week.
Great to see you.
Yeah, you too, buddy. Always fun. And thanks again for listening, folks. We'll catch you next week for another Between Two Sundays. Bye for now.
See ya.